Snow was drifting past the kitchen window, soft and steady, the kind that could make any house look peaceful from the outside. Inside, the heat from the fireplace rolled across the room, but it couldn't chase away the tension sitting under our roof. The kind you don't see not until a man like me walks into it and feels the temperature drop without anyone touching the thermostat. I watched the scene like it wasn't even my own family. Claire's smile was stretched thin, held together by nerves she thought no one would notice. Jordan kept checking the time on his watch, tapping the table with a rhythm too sharp for a holiday evening. And Sophie, God bless that child, kept swinging her legs under her chair, humming a tune that didn't quite match the carols playing on the speakers. Something was wrong. Not screaming wrong. Not breaking glass wrong. But the kind of wrong you smell before you see the smoke. The kind that makes an old man like me sit a little straighter, breathe a little slower, and pay attention. I'd walked through enough storms, military funerals, courtroom hallways, hospital waiting rooms, to recognize the air right before life decides to turn a page you're not ready for. And that page turned the very moment the ceiling light above the table flickered once, faint, but noticeable enough that I paused with my fork midway to the plate. The ceiling light above the table flickered once, faint, but noticeable enough that I paused with my fork midway to the plate. It steadied a heartbeat later, yet the room felt different, as if a small shift in the air had opened a narrow crack in the evening. The smell of roasted turkey and warm bread carried through the dining room, comforting at first, then oddly distant. I tried to settle into the moment, telling myself this was just another Christmas dinner, another attempt at holding a family together with polite conversation and shared dishes. Sophie was swinging her legs under the chair, humming a tune she had probably heard at school that morning. There was joy in her voice, simple and bright, the kind that makes a man forget his burdens for half a second. Then she lifted her head and looked at her father. "Why is there a second Christmas tree in the garage, Daddy?" The room went quiet before anyone could even process it. The heater clicked, then fell silent too. Jordan froze his hand, hovering above his plate. Claire pulled her hand back from his wrist. The same small defensive motion I had seen in Linda back when our marriage was slipping through the cracks. It hit me harder than I expected, stirring a heaviness I thought I had learned to bury. No one answered the question. No one even tried. A thin silence spread out across the table, settling into the folds of the tablecloth and the spaces between the dishes. The Christmas lights on the wall flickered again, but this time it felt less like a glitch and more like hesitation. Jordan pressed his lips together. Claire stared down at her lap. Sophie blinked, confused by the sudden change in the room. I felt something tighten low in my chest, the familiar weight of a father sensing a wrong turn before anyone admits it. There was no reason to get up, but I pushed my chair back anyway. The legs scraped lightly on the hardwood floor. I murmured that I would be right back, and though no one asked where I was going, the air at the table seemed to hold its breath. The hallway was dim, except for the soft glow of the living room tree. Its lights reflected off the ornaments like distant stars, warm but unreachable. When I opened the door to the garage, a thin gust of cold air brushed against my ankles. The bulb overhead flickered for several seconds before holding steady, illuminating the gray concrete floor and the shadowed corners of the room. The box sat where Sophie had said it would. It was taller than I expected, wide and heavy, the sort of box you only open once a season. But the tape running along its seam had been sliced in a straight, deliberate cut, too clean to be an accident. I stepped closer. The faint scent of new plastic drifted upward, and beneath it was a trace of perfume that did not belong to anyone in my family. It lingered in the cold air, unsettling in its softness. Something inside me sank, inside me. A quiet intuition. A warning. Behind me, a pair of soft footsteps stopped at the doorway. I turned and saw Eli standing there, coat unzipped, snow still clinging to his sleeves. His expression carried none of the easy warmth he usually brought into my home. He watched me for a moment before speaking. "I have seen Jordan coming out here late at night, Sam. More than once." The words were low, almost cautious, as if he already understood the weight they carried. I let them settle, not answering the truth inside them too close to something I had been trying not to name. I walked back toward the house without saying anything else. The warmth met me again as I opened the door, but it didn't feel like comfort anymore. It felt like something pretending to be safe. When I returned to my seat, no one looked at me. Jordan kept staring at his plate. Claire's shoulders were slightly hunched, as if bracing for something unspoken. The clock on the wall resumed its ticking, louder, now striking the quiet, like a reminder that time doesn't stop for secrets. I sat still and let the silence close around us, heavy and expectant. Somewhere beneath the glow of the Christmas lights, beneath the layers of holiday cheer and old habits, something had shifted. Something fragile had cracked open, and the night was no longer pretending otherwise. The heater murmured somewhere deeper in the house, a low settling sound that carried through the cracked garage door and brushed against the colder air around me. I felt it on my back, like a reminder of where I had come from, a thin warmth that could not quite reach the place my mind was drifting toward. A single drop of melted snow slipped from the doorframe and tapped onto the concrete. The small sound echoed more sharply than it should have, as if the whole garage were holding its breath. I stepped closer to the box. The overhead bulb flickered once the faintest tremor of light that made the shadows jump across the floor. My foot caught the edge of a thin draft curling under the garage door, and I paused, letting the cold circle my ankles. Something in that chill carried a warning that felt older than this night. I ignored it and knelt beside the box. The tape along the seam gleamed under the harsh bulb. A clean measured cut the line so straight it could have belonged to a jeweler's blade. This was not the work of a father grabbing a tree at the last minute. It was the work of someone patient, someone who respected precision. I hovered my hand above the line, not touching, just reading the intention behind it. Years of restoring antique watches had sharpened my eye, and I felt it awaken now, as if summoned by instinct. I lifted the lid. The faint scent inside drifted out plastic, mixed with something sweet and soft, that made the cold feel even sharper. The expensive green gift bag sat upright, its glossy surface catching the light. Too refined, too deliberate, too elegant for anything in our usual holiday routine. A folded slip rested beside it. When I picked it up, a pulse of unease ran through me. The jewelry store name stared up from the paper. The same name from the detective's email weeks ago. The one asking whether a rare clasp in a stolen necklace could have come from a maker I knew. At the time, the request felt distant, a favor extended to an old craftsman. Now, it felt as if that clasp had reached into my house and placed itself in my garage. The small tag on the gift bag moved when I breathed on it. I lifted it gently. One letter. S. My daughter's name started with that letter, but so could many others. I had the distinct and unwelcome sense that this was not meant for a child. When I set the tag down, my fingers brushed the inside flap of the box. Fine metallic dust shimmered like frost. My breath caught. I had seen that dust on my workshop table, on the sleeves of jewelers floating in the beams of morning sunlight in small repair studios. It belonged to skilled hands working on precious metal. It did not belong here. A sound shifted behind me, a soft exhale, the kind a man makes when trying not to startle someone. I turned toward the doorway. Jordan stood there. The warm kitchen light carved only half of him into view, leaving the other half swallowed by the garage's dim cold. His posture was stiff. Not surprised. Not concerned. Watching. His eyes traveled from the open box to my hands, then finally to my face. The silence between us tightened. He said something low, a half-formed question, or maybe a warning. It dissolved in the air before it reached me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A vibration sharp enough to jolt my breath. The screen glowed through the fabric of my shirt, a brief flash of blue against the dim. I pulled it out. The number was unfamiliar. Nevada. The message was short. Don't open that box again. I did not react, but the room felt different. Thinner. More dangerous. Jordan's breath hitched, barely noticeable, but it confirmed something I had not dared to say aloud. He knew, and he was afraid of what I had seen. I closed the lid softly. No sudden movements, no noise, just a deliberate quiet that felt heavier than any confrontation. Jordan stepped back as I stood, his weight shifting, as if bracing for something. I walked around him without touching his shoulder, yet he flinched slightly the way a man does when a truth has pressed too close. The hallway met me with warmth again, though the heat felt strained, as if the house itself sensed the tension that followed me. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey hung thick in the air. A faint carol drifted from the living room where the television glowed in soft colors. It all seemed too peaceful for what I carried in my chest. As I approached the dining room, I heard Sophie's voice. She asked Claire if I was coming back. Claire answered, but her words were hushed and uneven. When I entered, the lights looked the same, but everyone's eyes felt slightly averted, as if each person had heard a crack they could not identify. Linda watched me first, her gaze steady with quiet worry. Eli sat at the far end, leaning forward just enough to suggest he felt a change in the air. Jordan returned to his seat, moving slower, his phone resting near his hand. Claire avoided his eyes. Her fingers gripped the edge of her napkin. I lowered myself into my chair. The wood creaked softly. Nothing dramatic, just a sound that marked the moment. The clock on the wall began ticking again, sharper and louder each second, cutting through the silence. Outside, a car passed over fresh snow, its headlights sliding across the window, briefly lighting the tree in the living room. The ornaments caught the flash and gleamed like small warnings. The light faded. The room steadied. But inside me, something shifted in a way I could not undo. The box in the garage had not been a mistake. It had been an opening, and whatever waited beyond it was already moving closer. The clink of Sophie's spoon against her plate was the first sound I heard when I sat back down. It was small, almost delicate, yet it cut through the heavy quiet around the table in a way that made every breath feel measured. The lights above us glowed softly, but there was something uncertain in their warmth, a faint tremble in the shadows along the wall that hadn't been there earlier. I felt eyes flick toward me, and then away, as if each person sensed the shift in the evening without knowing its shape. The gift bag sat where I had placed it upright, and still the dark green paper reflecting a faint shimmer from the Christmas tree in the living room. I reached for it with a steadiness I did not entirely feel. The paper was cool under my fingers, too elegant for anything meant for this house. I heard Claire exhale softly, a breath thin enough that no one else might have noticed. Jordan's hand tapped once against the table, then stopped abruptly like he had caught himself in the middle of a habit. I opened the bag and lifted the small white box inside. The lid resisted slightly before giving way. The necklace caught the light, immediately scattering thin strands of reflection across the tablecloth. The room seemed to shrink a little around it. I turned the clasp gently the way I had been trained to handle delicate metal. The engraving was right where it should be. And once I saw the serial number, the truth settled with a clarity I couldn't step back from. It was the stolen piece from the police report. No guesswork. No coincidence. A faint tremor moved through Claire's breath. Her eyes found the necklace for only a heartbeat before she pulled her gaze away too quickly, as if afraid that looking longer would confirm something she had tried very hard not to see. Her hands tightened in her lap. She shifted her chair slightly, a movement so small yet so full of quiet guilt that my chest tightened. Jordan cleared his throat. The sound was thin and dry, scraping more than it should have. He said he had planned a surprise. His voice wavered mid-sentence and his eyes stayed locked on the far wall instead of his wife. His hand gave a short, involuntary shake. It was the kind of tremor a man tries to hide when he knows he has already lost control of a situation. I set the necklace down. As I did, a small crumpled paper slipped from beneath the box and landed near my hand. I picked it up and unfolded it slowly. 2 initials stared back at me. MG. Nothing else. The ink was smudged in one corner like someone had held the paper too tightly. A faint pull of memory tugged at the back of my mind, something unfinished and unwelcome. I didn't know the meaning yet, but the edges of it felt familiar enough to make my pulse press harder against my ribs. Without thinking, I reached for the pocket where I kept my father's watch. The gesture was instinctive, one I had done 1,000 times over the years. My fingers met only fabric. I checked the other pocket slower this time. Nothing. A hollow weight dropped through my chest. I had felt the watch earlier. I remembered adjusting it before dinner. And now there was only absence. I stood up without realizing I had done it. The room shifted slightly, the lights seeming to lean in closer. I touched the inside of my jacket, then the pocket again, my fingers searching for the familiar, cool metal that wasn't there. Claire looked up sharply. Her eyes met mine for the first time that night. Her lips parted as if she meant to speak, but she closed them again, the words catching somewhere behind fear or regret. Her shoulders curled inward. The guilt in her expression was unmistakable, the kind that comes from living with a truth she knew would hurt someone she loved. Sophie's voice cut gently into the moment, soft and uncertain. She asked if the necklace was pretty if I didn't like it. Her innocence made the silence heavier. Claire pulled her close with a trembling hand, whispering that everything was fine. The whisper was too fragile to believe. Jordan shifted in his seat. He said something about wanting the night to be special. His voice strained against a cracking edge he couldn't smooth over. He wasn't looking at anyone now. His hand hovered near his phone, almost protective, almost guilty. The posture of a man who knew the ground beneath him had shifted. The quiet around the table deepened. The Christmas lights along the wall flickered faintly, casting long, uneven shadows behind the chairs. Eli leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed on Jordan, with the wary calm of a man who had spent enough years reading the truth in other men's shoulders. Linda lifted her glass with an unsteady hand, the rim clinking softly against the table as she set it down again. I folded the paper with the initials and slipped it into my pocket. The gesture was slow, almost deliberate. I didn't know why, but it felt like a piece of something larger, a thread I would have to tug at sooner or later. My eyes drifted toward the living room. The tree glowed quietly, its reflection visible in the window. Outside, flakes of snow drifted gently down, settling over the driveway in soft white layers. The peaceful image stood in sharp contrast to the tension winding through my family. Holiday warmth against a truth that chilled deeper than winter air. Jordan's shoulders slumped a fraction. Claire pressed her hand to Sophie's back, her fingers trembling, and somewhere in the space between those small movements, the truth became clearer. The silence between us tonight had roots. It hadn't sprung from one innocent question. It had started months ago, maybe longer, and whatever waited beneath it was no longer willing to stay hidden. The heater clicked softly under the window as I eased back into my chair, its warm breath rising against my ankles. The sound should have been comforting, a reminder that the house was settling into its usual December rhythm, yet it only made the quiet around the table feel tighter. The lights from the living room tree reached the dining room in shaky reflections, stretching across the tablecloth like faded ribbons of gold. I watched one of them flicker across Claire's face before slipping away again. She still hadn't touched her dinner. Her fork lay beside her plate, the handle resting against her palm like she had forgotten it was there. She kept her eyes low, as if staring hard enough at the mashed potatoes might pull her away from everything happening in the room. She whispered something barely loud enough for me to catch. She said Jordan had not given her anything meaningful in years. Then she added that nothing he ever brought home felt as expensive or thoughtful as the necklace sitting a few inches from her hand. Her words did not accuse. They simply existed, and somehow that made them heavier. Before anyone could react, Sophie lifted her face, the light catching the edges of her hair. She asked why the blonde lady came to the back door so often. She asked it with the innocence of a child describing a bird at the feeder, unaware that the adults around her froze the moment the words left her mouth. The room shifted. Even the heater seemed to pause before exhaling again. Jordan stiffened. It was the kind of reaction a man cannot rehearse or hide. His shoulders tightened, his eyes closed for a fraction of a second. His fingers gripped the table as if steadying himself against a sudden tremor. The mask he had worn through the evening cracked down the center, just enough for every person at that table to see what lay underneath. Linda's reaction came quietly. She reached across the table and rested her hand on Claire's shoulder, her fingers brushing gently through the fabric of her sweater. There was no urgency in the touch, only the warmth of someone who had walked through her own storms. Her eyes held a recognition I had seen only once or twice in my life, the look of a woman who understood too well the weight of silent suffering. I reached into my coat again, hoping for something that was no longer there. The inside pocket felt empty. I pressed my fingers along the seam, then deeper, as though the watch might be hiding in the fabric itself. The familiar weight of my father's silver watch had been my anchor for decades. Now I felt only cloth. A small breath caught in my chest, and for a brief second I was not a man sitting at a Christmas table. I was a son who had lost something irreplaceable. I lowered my hand slowly. When I looked up, Jordan's eyes found Linda. The glance lasted less than a second, but it carried something layered and old, a hint of shared knowledge, a warning buried under years of polite family distance. It was subtle, but not subtle enough. The air in the room shifted with it tightening around the edges like cold stretching across a window. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned slightly and saw Eli standing in the hallway. He had one shoulder leaned against the wall, partially in shadow, watching the room as if he had stepped into a story he had hoped would never unfold. His expression was quiet, steady, but his eyes held the kind of concern men rarely voice aloud. He was taking everything in, weighing every movement, every silence. The table sat between all of us like a border we were afraid to cross. The plates of food, once steaming and full of holiday comfort, now felt out of place. The soft scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, sweet but distant, like it belonged to another evening entirely. I could feel something tightening in the center of the room, a careful tension held together by frayed threads of patience. Sophie slid closer to Claire, sensing something, but not understanding it. Claire lifted her daughter into her lap with a slow, controlled motion. She pressed her cheek against the top of Sophie's head, her eyes closing briefly. Her hands trembled. She whispered that everything was all right. But her voice betrayed her. It wavered just enough for me to hear the truth behind it. She was holding her child, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. Jordan finally spoke. His voice was thin, stretched across a tone he could not quite steady. He said children misremember things. He told Sophie not to worry about it. He told Claire that people often come to the back door for deliveries. Then he added my name and told me we were all reading too much into nothing. He kept his eyes down as he said it. His fingers tapped against his phone like he was waiting for a message that might save him from whatever truth was circling the table. Claire called his name. She said it softly, a single fragile note that carried more hurt than any raised voice could. Her eyes searched his face, but he would not meet her gaze. She tightened her arm around Sophie, pulling her a little closer, as if distance from Jordan was suddenly the only comfort she could trust. I watched the necklace resting on the table. I watched the empty pocket of my coat. I watched the slight tremor in Claire's hands and the careful stillness in Eli's stance. Every detail felt like a small piece of a larger truth coming into focus. The Christmas lights flickered again. Shadows along the wall stretched and shifted, bending over the edges of the table like something unseen had stepped into the room. The air felt colder, not from the weather, but from the words no one dared say. Sophie's question had not broken the evening. It had only revealed where the cracks already ran. And somewhere beneath those cracks a truth waited with the patience of something that had been ignored too long. The fuse was lit, and the quiet of the room told me the next spark was not far behind. The kitchen felt warmer than the rest of the house, not because of the oven still humming from dinner, but because every person in it seemed to carry a different kind of heat. Claire stood near the sink, with her back slightly curved, as if trying to make herself smaller. Linda's eyes followed her, then flicked toward me with a look that asked for a word alone. I stepped away from the dining room and into the quiet of the kitchen hallway, letting the soft clatter of plates behind me fade. Linda spoke low, her voice steady but strained. She said Claire had come to her 5 months ago, asking for $18,000 to cover a debt she called urgent. Claire had begged her not to involve me. Linda said she hesitated, but she could not turn her away. Her hands trembled slightly as she talked, and there was an old shadow in her eyes that told me she had lived through this kind of desperation before. I asked why she never mentioned it. She lowered her gaze and whispered that she thought Claire was handling it, and she was afraid to reopen wounds we had both worked hard to close. A faint scrape came from the hallway, the soft run of small feet across hardwood. A moment later, Sophie appeared with a stuffed reindeer tucked under her arm. She looked up at us with that easy innocence children carry even in troubled houses. She said she had seen her father yesterday, placing Grandpa's silver watch into the trunk of the car. She asked if it was supposed to stay there. The reindeer's ear brushed her cheek as she spoke, and for a second the room seemed to still under the weight of her quiet honesty. My chest tightened. I felt my hand close involuntarily, not in anger, but in the shock of losing something that had belonged to generations before me. Claire entered the kitchen then. She stopped when she saw us. Her shoulders lifted once, as if she wanted to brace herself against words she already knew were coming. Her breath caught and her eyes filled quicker than she could blink. She tried to speak. The first sound broke inside her throat. When her tears came, they were silent, the kind that fall from someone who has held too much for too long. Linda stepped closer, ready to steady her if her knees gave out. A buzz cut through the moment, sharp and persistent. Jordan's phone from the dining room, the same number that had been calling all night. The ringing kept repeating, one vibration after another, each one tightening the air. I heard his chair push back its legs, scraping the floor. The movement had an edge to it, like he was preparing to defend himself before anyone spoke a word. I felt more than saw him standing in the doorway. His presence pressed into the space before he even stepped inside. He looked at Claire first, then at me, then at Sophie. His face was too controlled, the jaw set a little too firmly, the silence held a little too long. I saw something flicker in his eyes, a mix of irritation and fear. The kind of fear a man has when the walls he built too quickly begin to shift around him. I asked Claire quietly if she wanted to tell me what was happening. She nodded once, slow and small. She said she had tried to fix things on her own, thinking she could keep the family from falling apart. She said she was ashamed of how much she had allowed and how much she had hidden. Her words came out uneven, broken by breaths she struggled to steady. She said she felt trapped, and every month the pressure grew until she felt like someone had a hand on the back of her neck, pushing her underwater. I stepped nearer and placed a hand on the counter to keep myself grounded. My pulse had started to thrum at the base of my throat. I told her she was not alone. Not now. My voice felt heavier than my thoughts, weighted by all the things I should have seen sooner. Another vibration shook the silence. Jordan muttered something into his phone and stepped back toward the dining room. He did not close the door, and I heard the low edge in his voice. He said he could not talk now. He said they needed to wait. He said the situation was changing. There was a muffled reply I could not make out, but the tone on the other end was urgent. Sophie leaned into Claire's leg, and Claire rested a hand on her daughter's lap. Her fingers trembled the entire time. I watched her, seeing in her posture a reflection of the years Linda once endured, the years I once failed to fully understand. Family wounds carry familiar shapes, and in that moment, I recognized every one of them. Eli appeared at the threshold of the kitchen. He did not step inside, but the look on his face was enough to speak for him. He had seen men unravel under pressure before. He had seen homes reach their breaking point. His quiet presence felt like a warning floating in from the hallway. I stood with all of them gathered in such a small space, the warm light overhead cutting soft shadows across the floor. I understood I was no longer standing on the sidelines of someone else's choices. The air around us felt like it was tilting toward something unavoidable. The house held its breath, and I felt myself standing at the edge of a line I had crossed once in my past, and swore never to cross again. I could not lose this family. Not again. Not to silence, not to secrets, not to a man who had brought shadows into my daughter's home. A soft thump came from the front of the house, a door closing. Maybe the wind. Maybe something else. I knew whatever waited beyond this moment was already moving toward us. A sharp thud came from the front of the house, the kind that could have been a door shifting in the wind or someone moving too quickly. It was enough to pull me from the stillness of the kitchen. The lights above hummed faintly, and the warmth felt heavier than before, as if the house itself was bracing for whatever was coming next. I took a slow breath and stepped toward the hallway, letting the brightness fade behind me. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. A single vibration, nothing more. When I checked it, a photo from Eli was already on the screen. The image appeared in pieces, loading through the light reflection from the Christmas tree. It was my father's watch lying on a velvet display framed by the corner of a collector's desk. The listing carried a price that felt unreal, yet familiar in the worst way. $42,000. The serial number below it matched the one engraved on the hinge, the same number I had memorized years ago when I held the watch after my father's funeral. My fingers tightened around the phone. The room around me seemed to steady and tilt at the same time. I remembered the night Jordan asked to look at a friend's watch. It had been late, and I had stepped out to take a call. My father's watch had been sitting on the workbench, still shining from the polish I'd applied only minutes before. I could still see the lamp's glow on its surface, and I could still hear the soft click of the workshop door closing behind me. I had assumed too much trust in a man I barely knew. The Christmas lights across the living room shimmered softly, casting colors across the hardwood floor. The house felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that settles when truth pushes its way in. I moved toward the window that faced the backyard. Through the thin layer of frost on the glass, I saw Jordan pacing near the shed. His shoulders were hunched, his breath showing in quick bursts as he spoke into his phone. I could hear fragments of his voice traveling through the still air. "They're close. I can't get the money fast enough." Each word sharpened the edge already forming around the night. Behind me, the sound of running water stopped. Linda stood by the sink, her hand resting on the counter, as if steadying herself. She did not ask what I had seen. Her eyes were enough. They held a tired knowledge, an echo of a past none of us talked about anymore. I watched her thumb move across the rim of a plate she had washed twice. That simple motion carried years of quiet endurance. Footsteps creaked from the floor above. Claire's voice drifted down in low murmurs, soothing Sophie into sleep. The softness in her tone made something in my chest tighten. I felt the weight of all the moments she had carried alone, believing silence was the safest choice. I wondered how many nights she stood in this house, listening to whispers she did not understand, or arguments she tried to shield her daughter from. A presence filled the doorway. Eli stepped in without sound, his coat still open, his breath visible from the cold. He didn't speak at first. He only looked at me with a steady calm that men who have seen too much trouble tend to hold. He nodded slightly toward the backyard, where Jordan's shadow moved back and forth. The nod said he already knew what I knew. That we were past coincidence, past misunderstandings. This was something deliberate, something that wasn't going to clean itself up quietly. I walked into the living room where the photos on the wall caught the soft reflection of the Christmas lights. My father holding Claire when she was small. Claire on a pier with sunlight on her hair. Memories that felt warmer than the room around me. The empty armchair near the fireplace stood in the corner, like an unspoken reminder of what had been lost before and what could be lost again. My father's watch belonged in that chair, not on a collector's desk with a price tag attached. The back door clicked open, and cold air slipped into the house. Jordan stepped inside, brushing a few snowflakes from his sleeve. He scanned the room, his eyes moving quickly, measuring everything. For a moment he seemed unsure of his place, as if the house no longer recognized him. His gaze met mine, and he hesitated. The hesitation was brief, but it carried the truth he was trying to hold back. He murmured that he needed to make a call and moved toward the dining room. His voice was a forced calm, the sort men use when they are trying to control a situation already slipping away. The phone buzzed again in his hand. He turned his back slightly, lowering his tone to a near whisper. Claire appeared on the staircase, stopping at the last step. She kept to the shadows, her arms wrapped around herself. When Jordan spoke, her shoulders tensed. It was small but sharp, like a reflex learned from too many nights filled with dread. She looked at me with a question she couldn't bring herself to voice. I walked toward the window again and watched the snow begin to fall in slow, drifting flakes. They caught the porch light and glimmered as they touched the ground. The stillness outside contrasted with the tension building inside each breath of the house, waiting for the next shift. Eli came to stand beside me. He spoke quietly enough that only I could hear him. "We are past excuses." His words settled over me like the cold outside. He didn't need to say more. The photo of the watch, the whispers in the backyard, the fear in Claire's posture, all led to one truth. This was no longer family strain. It was a line crossed into something darker. A faint knock came from somewhere deeper in the house. A door, a floorboard, or something else. Whatever it was, it marked the end of waiting. Claire stepped fully into the room, and the look in her eyes confirmed it. The time for silence had passed. I felt the night tilt the kind of shift that comes before everything breaks open. And standing there with the snow drifting outside and shadows moving across the floor, I knew the truth was no longer approaching. It was already here. The house felt too still when I stepped out of the hallway, and into Claire's room, the air warmer than the rest of the house, as if the heat had gathered there all evening without being released. A thin draft slipped under the window pane, carrying the faint rattle of the sleet, tapping the glass. Somewhere downstairs, a fork scraped a plate, a quick metallic sound that rose and faded before I could place who it belonged to. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the softer light before moving toward the dresser where Claire kept the things she never talked about. I pulled the top drawer open, and the wood gave a quiet pop, a tired sound from old hinges. The neat stack of folded shirts looked untouched, almost staged. I slid my hand along the back panel and felt a ridge that did not belong. When I pressed it, the thin board shifted with a muted snap. That brief noise felt loud to me, though the room stayed silent as if holding its breath. Beneath the false bottom sat a folder thick with papers that had no reason to be hidden unless someone feared they would be found. I lifted the folder, and the weight of it made my chest tighten. Mortgage contracts with Claire's name, printed clearly. Signatures that looked like hers, yet carried a tremor in the pen strokes, the kind born of pressure or fear. I knew enough about DocuSign to recognize the flagged sections where a signature was required, but did not match the usual digital smoothness. Someone had pushed her, or someone had pretended to be her. Bank statements were tucked inside folded twice edges, soft from handling. Transfers listed each month to an account labeled MG Holdings Las Vegas, the same initials I had seen on the small, crumpled note. Seeing them here made my stomach drop. Nothing about it felt accidental anymore. The dresser drawer clicked behind me. Claire stood at the threshold, one hand pressed to the frame as if steadying herself. Her eyes were red at the corners, the kind of red that comes from holding back tears over many nights, not just one. She looked at the papers in my hands, then lifted her gaze in a way that told me she knew this moment had been waiting for her, even if she had hoped it would never come. She spoke barely above a whisper. "I did not want you pulled into this." Her voice cracked, and I could hear the strain of months spent walking on the edge of something heavy and unsafe. I set the folder on the bed and moved a step closer. She held her arms as if the cold had found her, even though the room was warm. When she finally spoke again, each word carried the weight of something lived in silence too long. He said he would take Sophie if I didn't sign. The room felt smaller after she said it. The sleet outside pressed harder at the window. I thought of the nights I had sensed her distance and mistaken it for simple fatigue. Her shoulders trembled, once a small motion that said more than anything she could have explained. Before I could answer, Linda appeared beside her, her hand moving gently to Claire's back, steady and quiet. Linda's eyes met mine, and in them I saw an old ache, a pain she recognized too well. Do not let this become what we lived through. Her words came soft, almost carried by the heat in the room, and for a moment the past brushed up against us like a shadow. I felt it settle in my chest, the memory of a home collapsing under secrets not addressed soon enough. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, the kind of creak that comes from someone standing still rather than someone walking. I looked over my shoulder and saw Jordan leaning in the doorway. The light behind him stretched his shadow into the room long and dark across the floor. His face was unreadable at first, but then I caught the tightness around his mouth, a strain hiding just beneath the surface. His eyes dropped to the folder on the mattress. When he looked back up, the mask he usually wore slipped just a little. He tried to speak, but his voice wavered halfway between anger and something colder. "There is more Claire hasn't told you." The words hung in the room heavy enough to make Claire flinch and press closer to Linda. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten, not from anger alone, but from the cold certainty that he was not finished, that whatever he hinted at had edges sharp enough to cut deeper. I stepped forward, not threatening, just blocking the dresser, blocking the papers he clearly did not want exposed. Jordan's jaw shifted. His eyes flicked briefly toward the corner of the room, toward a small wooden box Claire kept on the floor beside her nightstand. That quick dart of his gaze told me more than his words. I followed the motion and saw the box had been nudged slightly open, just enough to reveal a corner of something leather inside, something he must have been looking for. The house settled again, a soft groan from the heating vents below the floor. It felt like all the walls were listening. Claire's breathing grew uneven, her hands gripping the sleeves of her sweater. Linda's hand stayed steady on her back, but her shoulders tensed. Jordan took one step into the room. The light caught the side of his face and sharpened the lines that had once seemed so clean, so harmless. His voice lowered almost a growl under the breath. "You really do not know everything." He glanced again at that wooden box. I did not move to look inside yet. I held his gaze instead, letting the silence fill the space until it pressed against all of us. A car passed on the street outside, tires hissing on the wet pavement. Its headlights cast a brief glow across the bedroom wall, a pale shifting band of light that moved over the papers on the bed, over Claire's trembling hands, over the tight knot in my chest. When it faded, the room fell quiet again. Too quiet. Jordan stayed at the doorway, caught in the flicker between retreat and confrontation, his eyes still sliding toward the box on the floor, as if the thing inside could change the outcome of this night. I did not open it. Not yet. I let the silence sit instead, cold and thick, waiting to break in whatever direction it would when the time came. The room was still trembling from the moment Jordan's voice cracked in the hallway, and the quiet that followed carried the weight of every truth he had tried so hard to bury. The papers from Claire's dresser lay on the bed behind me, edges lifting slightly each time the heater pushed warm air through the vents. That soft rustle was the only sound, until Jordan stepped forward and the floor let out a warning groan beneath him. He moved fast, his hand cutting the air as he reached for the folder. The motion was sharp enough to make Claire draw a quick breath. Sophie, who had wandered back toward the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, froze. Her small voice caught in her throat before it could become a word, and then she cried a sound so fragile it broke whatever steadiness was left in the house. Claire wrapped her arms around her daughter with that instinct only mothers carry deep in their bones. The kind of instinct that comes from nights spent waiting for footsteps, from learning to protect in silence. She pulled Sophie close and held her head as if to shield her from the world. I stayed planted where I was. No raised voice, no sudden move, only a stillness I knew would rattle him more than anything I could say. Jordan stopped short of the bed, his fingers trembling before curling uselessly at his side. His breath quickened, uneven and loud in the tight space. He tried to swallow it down to gather whatever was left of the man he pretended to be. He forced out a laugh that rang hollow. "I only sold a few antiques to cover debts." The words spilled out too quickly. They wavered in the air, thin and desperate. He looked at me, waiting for me to believe him, waiting for someone to take the pressure off his chest. I said nothing. My silence seemed to close in around him. He turned away and wiped his palms on his jeans. His shoulders jerked once, then again, as if he couldn't keep still. The quiet in the room felt charged, like the moment before winter, thunder breaks the sky. A deep knock hit the front door. It was not gentle. Not curious. It was the kind of knock meant for nights when something has gone wrong. The sound traveled through the hall like a cold breath and settled under my ribs. Jordan stiffened his head, jerking toward the noise. He waited for another knock, and it came sharper than the first, echoing through the living room. Claire looked at me over Sophie's hair, her eyes no longer hiding, no longer pretending. Linda moved closer behind them, her hand resting lightly on Claire's back, in a gesture both protective and knowing. I walked toward the stairs, the soft glow of the Christmas lights along the banister flickering as I moved past. The porch light shone through the frosted glass of the front door, turning the falling sleet into streaks of silver. When I opened the door, the winter air moved past me in a cold wave. 2 officers stood beneath the light, their jackets damp, their breath visible in small clouds. "Evening, sir." We received a call from a neighbor who heard yelling. Their tone was calm but alert. One of them stepped slightly forward and glanced inside, noting the tension that clung to the room. His eyes paused on Jordan, who had edged halfway into the kitchen, but could not seem to commit to stepping fully inside. "We just want to make sure everyone here is all right." Claire held Sophie a little tighter. I saw the officer register that, and shift his stance, softening just enough to show he understood what kind of night this was. Jordan swallowed hard. His fingers gripped the counter behind him, then released, then gripped again. He kept his gaze low, as if looking the officers in the eye might break whatever fragile lie he was still holding on to. The second officer stepped just past the threshold when I nodded. His boots left small, wet marks on the hardwood, each print a reminder that the outside world had finally entered this house. The porch light flickered once behind me, a small tremor that made the holiday decorations cast shifting shadows across the walls. I could feel Jordan's panic filling the room, a rising pressure that pushed against the windows and doors. His voice came out thin. "There's nothing wrong." But the way he said it made the officers exchange a quick glance. Claire looked at me again, and this time there was something like relief beneath the worry in her eyes, as if the moment she had feared was also the moment she had needed. Jordan stepped back until his shoulders touched the refrigerator. The metallic hum behind him filled the silence he could not. His eyes darted to the back door to the hallway, to anywhere that was not the truth, standing in front of him wearing blue and black. I felt my breath settle low in my chest. The sleet cracked softly against the window. The Christmas lights hummed faintly, their colors reflecting off the officers' badges. For the first time all night, Jordan looked truly cornered, not by accusation, not by anger, but by the simple fact that he could no longer run from what he had done. The walls of the house seemed to pull inward, making the space around him smaller with each passing second. I stayed silent, letting him feel the full weight of it. When he finally lifted his eyes, there was no defiance left in them. The truth had arrived. And it was not leaving. The house felt hollow after the officers stepped back out into the cold. Their footsteps faded down the walkway, and the door settled into its frame with a dull click that hung in the air longer than it should have. The snow outside caught the porch light in slow, drifting motions, soft and quiet, as if the night wanted to pretend nothing had happened here. But the tension left behind made every shadow feel sharper. The folded documents were still warm from my hands, the ink on the forged signatures seeming darker, now heavier somehow, as if the truth they carried had weight. I stood in the living room, trying to slow my breathing. The smell of pine from the tree mixed with something faintly metallic, maybe from the open heater vent behind me, or maybe just from my own nerves. Claire sat on the couch with Sophie tucked against her side. Sophie's eyes were wide and restless, searching the room the way children do when they sense danger but can't name it. Jordan paced by the kitchen island, rubbing the back of his neck, muttering half-sentences that didn't fit together. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Once, twice, then again. The quiet buzz felt strangely out of place in the charged silence. I stepped toward the hallway for a little privacy, though privacy had become a foreign word tonight. When I answered, a calm voice spoke my name. Marcus Dean. I hadn't heard from him in years, not since the case involving a rare Longines from the 30s that ended up crossing state lines and needed expert confirmation. He had been measured and professional then, and he sounded the same now. He told me they had been monitoring Jordan for several weeks, and that tonight's police dispatch flagged the house, confirming suspicions they had been trying to verify. They had recovered a watch in a safe in Jordan's office, the exact model and year of my father's. He paused before he mentioned the serial number. He knew I didn't need to hear it. I could feel the truth in the silence that followed. I moved to the window overlooking the backyard. Through the glass, I saw Jordan slip outside and pull his phone from his pocket. He seemed smaller somehow, hunched his breath, showing in short bursts. A string of urgent words spilled from him, carried away by the night air. It didn't take much imagination to fill in the blanks. He was cornered, and he knew it. His hands kept lifting toward his hair, gripping, then releasing like he was trying to pull himself out of whatever he had sunk into. Inside, Claire's voice barely rose above a whisper as she tried to soothe Sophie, but her eyes stayed locked on the doorway, waiting for Jordan to return, or for something worse. Linda stayed close beside her, a steady presence, even as her own worry showed in every line of her face. It struck me that this scene wasn't new to her. Different people, different house, different decade, but the same pattern. Marcus kept talking, explaining the pieces they had collected: stolen jewelry, falsified appraisals, coerced debts funneled through shell accounts under the initials we had already seen. Transfers to holdings in Las Vegas. Associates who turned on each other when charges mounted. He didn't say the word ring, but the implication lay heavy between each fact he revealed. Jordan was part of something bigger than a few bad choices. When I stepped back into the kitchen, Jordan re-entered from the backyard, breathing hard, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that hadn't changed position since the last time he looked. His phone slipped slightly in his hand. He tightened his grip and checked the screen again before shoving it deep into his pocket. Claire spoke his name softly. It broke something in him, or maybe it broke the last layer of his facade. He shook his head, and for a fleeting second I saw not the man who had threatened her, not the man who had stolen from me, but someone terrified of consequences he'd been outrunning too long. He stepped closer to Claire, as if he wanted to say something to her, something personal, something urgent. But when he saw me standing beside the table, the words caught in his throat. His shoulders squared defensively, and the moment passed. Marcus's voice lingered in my mind, calm and decisive. They were deploying a team. They were close. He advised keeping everyone inside, keeping Jordan in sight, and keeping the environment as controlled as possible until agents arrived. Through the front window, I noticed movement down the street. Not the bright flash of police blues, but something subtler. Unmarked cars cruising slowly, stopping under the street lamp. Then another vehicle easing into view. Snow muffled everything except the crunch of tires on packed ice. The night felt like it was holding its breath. Jordan must have sensed something shift because he looked outside too. His face drained of color. His hand hovered near his pocket where the phone sat. I saw the decision flicker across his eyes, the instinct to run. But the snow outside, the cold, the approaching cars made it clear there was nowhere left to go. Sophie whimpered and buried her face into Claire's sweater. Claire held her with both arms now, no hesitation, no attempt to hide her fear. Only the need to protect. Linda stood behind them, ready if something broke. The house lights dimmed slightly as the heater kicked on, the warm air humming through the vents. It felt strangely calm for a moment. But it was the kind of calm that comes before something larger arrives, something inevitable. I stepped closer to the front door, listening to the muted rumble of engines outside. Footsteps approached, slow but purposeful. I could almost picture the badges already glinting under the porch light. Claire looked at me, her eyes asking a question she couldn't voice. I didn't have an answer, not yet. Another knock sounded firm and steady, the kind of knock that changes a family forever. I drew a breath, feeling the weight of the night settle in my chest as I reached for the door. Claire closed the den door with a soft click, the kind of sound that pretends it has no meaning. She stayed there for a moment with her hand on the frame. Her breath rose and fell in a shallow pattern, and she would not meet my eyes. Outside the window, the snowfall thickened, turning the porch light into a dim halo. The house hummed with a low vibration from the heater, and somewhere deeper inside an agent's radio crackled before going silent again. None of it broke the stillness between us. She stepped closer, rubbing her palms together as if trying to warm them. "Dad," she said, and the word wavered. "I need to tell you something before they take him." I waited. I did not move. Something in me understood that any sudden motion might make her retreat behind the wall she had lived behind for too long. Claire took a seat on the edge of the old recliner near the window. It had been here since the kids were young, and the fabric was worn in the exact place where I used to rest my arm. Her fingers tightened on the armrest as she tried to steady herself. "This has been going on all year," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. It did not sound like a confession. It sounded like a woman fighting her own memory. He kept saying it was temporary. He kept saying he was handling it. But it got worse. He started talking about what would happen if I ever left. Or if I ever told you. She swallowed hard and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I thought if I kept Sophie safe and stayed quiet, things would calm down. She gave a small, broken laugh. They never did. I felt something settle in my chest, a familiar weight I remembered from the days my family crumbled the first time. The sense that someone you love was suffering in the same room as you, and you had not seen enough to stop it. Claire pulled something from her sweater pocket. A small USB drive, pink plastic with a faded cartoon sticker on it. Sophie found this, she said. Inside her old teddy bear, the one he tore open last week. She handed it to me with a kind of reverence, as if it were both evidence and confession. I turned it in my fingers. It was warm from her hand. She said she wanted to keep it safe for me. She thought it was important. There was a silence that felt heavier than words. The den lights flickered a moment under winter strain. I watched part of the video, Claire whispered. He made one of his employees sign some debt papers. There was another man there watching. I could tell the employee was terrified. Claire took a breath that broke halfway through. He said he would take Sophie if I did not sign what he gave me. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. She folded into herself, elbows on her knees. It was the posture of someone who had run out of places to hide. I crouched beside her. I did not speak right away. A part of me wrestled with anger so deep it frightened me, but another part blamed myself. I should have known. I should have seen it in the small hesitations, the excuses, the way she always called back, instead of answering the phone on the first ring. Claire looked at me finally. Her eyes were red but steady. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I shook my head. No, sweetheart. I am sorry I was not paying close enough attention. Her lip trembled at that. She leaned into me, and for a long moment she let herself cry the way someone cries when they have stopped explaining why. When she pulled back, she reached into the small folder the agents had left on the table. A photograph slipped free and fluttered onto the carpet between us. I picked it up. It was Jordan, standing next to the same cold-eyed man Agent Dean showed me earlier. They were in some kind of back office, and Jordan was holding a stack of documents with a triumphant grin that did not belong to the man I once trusted enough to welcome into my daughter's life. Claire's breath caught when she saw the photo in my hand. She reached out, touching the edge of the print as if she needed to confirm it was real each time. I kept thinking he might stop, she said, or that I could manage it long enough for Sophie to grow older and understand. But he kept pushing. He kept finding new ways to scare me. She shook harder now, and I set the photo aside so I could hold her. You are not alone anymore, I said. You will never face him alone again. Her shoulders collapsed into my chest. For the first time since she arrived tonight, she allowed the full weight of her fear to show. Outside the den window, the snowfall drifted sideways, blown by a rising wind. A car door shut in the front driveway, probably one of the agents repositioning. The sound made Claire jump, and I felt her grip my sweater. Dad, she whispered, her voice small and tired. I was so afraid you would be disappointed in me. I pulled back just enough to look at her face. Disappointed. No, Claire. My only disappointment is that you thought you had to face all of this without me. She pressed her forehead to my shoulder. I felt the warmth of her breath through the fabric. I did not want you to think I had failed as a mother. You protected that little girl through hell, I said. That is not failure. That is strength. The den fell into a quiet that felt different from before. Less brittle. More like a place beginning to breathe again. Claire eased back and wiped her eyes. There is more on the USB, she said. I did not watch all of it. I could not. I did not want Sophie to see. I closed my fingers around the small drive. We will figure it out, one piece at a time. A faint knock sounded from the hallway. Not urgent, not loud, but enough to remind us the night was not finished. Someone clearing a throat followed. It was an agent waiting to speak to me. Claire looked toward the door, then back at me. Are you ready for what comes next? No, I said, but that does not matter. What matters is that we are facing it together. Her eyes softened. For the first time all night, she looked less like a frightened woman and more like the daughter I remembered. I stood and offered her my hand. She took it. We walked toward the den door, the soft glow from the hallway spilling under the frame like a quiet warning. And as I turned the handle, I felt the weight of the USB in my pocket, small but heavy enough to shift the course of the night. We stepped out together into whatever waited on the other side. The snow had thickened by the time the agents stepped through my doorway, the kind of snow that deadened every sound outside, but sharpened every breath inside. It hissed softly against the porch windows while the house filled with footsteps and the scrape of boots on hardwood. I felt the whole night tightening around us, the same way heavy storm clouds narrow the sky before breaking. Jordan stood near the dining room arch, his shoulders rising and falling in quick, shallow bursts. When he saw the agents carrying a locked evidence case rather than touching the drive Claire had given them, a flicker of calculation crossed his face. He was already reading exits, already measuring people. Eli remained between him and the back of the house. His stance was subtle, not aggressive, but enough to let Jordan know that slipping past him would mean a struggle. Claire held Sophie close on the couch. Linda sat beside them, one arm braced behind Claire, steadying her without making a show of it. Agent Dean nodded to me and spoke quietly so the women would not hear the edge beneath his words. "We secured your watch earlier today. It is part of a larger chain of evidence. We may need your voice tonight." I said nothing. I only felt my jaw tighten as I followed him toward the living room, where the agents set their equipment on the coffee table. They worked with a quiet precision that pulled the air even tighter. No one in that room could pretend the situation was still a family argument. It had grown too large, too sharp, too real. Jordan stepped forward. His voice tried for confidence, but cracked at the edges. "This is a mistake," he said. "There is no need for a show like this. We can talk privately." Agent Dean met his eye. "We are past talking." A hush fell. Even the snow seemed to pause against the window glass. The agents opened the evidence case. Inside were printed screenshots, bank ledgers, and still frames taken from videos. Each document was sealed in clear, protective sleeves. Jordan's face appeared on the top page of one sheet, caught in mid-sentence as he forced a man to sign a document. The angle was grainy from a camera hidden somewhere low. It did not flatter him. It did not lie. Jordan took one step back, then another. His voice rose. "That is not what it looks like. People lie. People want money. You have no idea what these men are part of." Dean answered him with a level tone. "We know exactly what they are part of. The question is what you chose to be part of." I saw panic flash across Jordan's face. Not fear of prison, fear of exposure. Fear of losing the illusion he had spent years constructing. Fear of standing stripped of every excuse in front of the family he believed he had mastered. A memory hit me quickly, the kind that rises without warning. Years ago, during my divorce from Linda, I had stood in a mediation room with the same feeling in my chest. Not guilt, but the knowledge that a moment had arrived that would define everything after. A moment where silence would destroy more than truth. Jordan lunged for the stack of documents. I stepped forward before I even realized I was moving. My voice came out low but steady. "Stop." He froze his hand inches from the papers, and for a second, he looked at me with something close to hatred. Then he shifted and tried to push past me toward the kitchen. Eli blocked him before I could. Agent Dean made a signal. Another agent stepped behind Jordan, securing his wrists. Jordan fought, twisting hard enough to knock over a framed picture on the end table. The glass cracked across the image of Claire holding Sophie in the backyard years ago. Claire flinched at the sound and held Sophie tighter. Jordan spat out words as the agent steadied him. "You do not know what I was dealing with. You do not know what she hid from me." His eyes snapped toward Claire, sharp and accusing. She looked away, and I felt the breaking point rise in me, like something physical. I had stood back too many times in my life. I had watched pain settle into the women I loved. I had swallowed my voice because I thought being calm meant being wise. But this time calm had allowed rot to grow inside my daughter's home. I stepped forward until Jordan had no choice but to face me. My words came slower than I expected, but heavier. "You hurt my family. You stole from me. You dragged Claire into something dangerous, and you made her afraid of telling the truth. You do not get to shift that onto her now." Jordan stopped struggling, but not because he accepted the words. He studied my face the way a cornered man studies a wall looking for cracks. Then his expression changed, softened even, and that softness was far more dangerous than his anger. He spoke quietly. "You think she told you everything?" A chill went through the room, sharper than the weather outside. Dean stepped close. "What do you mean by that?" Jordan closed his eyes for a moment, as if weighing whether the damage he could cause would be worth it. When he opened them again, he looked straight at me. "Ask him who MG really is." He nodded toward me, not Claire. Not Linda. Me. Silence tightened every muscle in the air. The agents paused. Linda looked at me sharply. Claire's hand froze on Sophie's back. I felt the weight of years press behind my ribs, a name I had tried to bury, a past I had never intended to step into this house. Agent Dean broke the silence with a steady voice. "Sir, is there something we should know?" Before I could answer, before I could even breathe fully, Jordan said under his breath, just loud enough for the room to hear. He kept more secrets than I ever did. The words hung there like frost in the air, sharp and suspended. The agents lifted him to his feet and began walking him toward the front door. The Christmas lights flickered on the porch as they opened it, casting red and green patterns across the floor. Snow swept in on the wind, cold and bright. I stood rooted, the question lodged in the air between us, heavier than any evidence on the table. Who is MG? The door closed behind Jordan, and the house fell into a stillness so deep it felt hollow. And before anyone could speak, my phone vibrated once in my pocket with a message from an unknown number, the same Nevada area code as before. "We are coming." I did not open it. I only felt every eye in the room turn toward me, waiting for an answer I was not ready to give. The morning after the storm of the night before the world outside my window lay still under a clean layer of snow. The kind that softens the sound of everything, as if the whole street had agreed to keep quiet for a while. I stood there for a long moment, letting the cold light settle into me. My hands were steady again, though I could still feel the echo of yesterday in the ache behind my ribs. Sophie was already awake. I found her by the back door tracing a small circle in the fog of the glass. She turned toward me with the soft look children have when they sense a room has changed. She asked if we could bring the second tree inside now. I nodded. Words felt too heavy for that hour, and her small hand slipping into mine was all the yes I needed. We carried the tree through the hall, where last night's voices still seemed to hover. The branches brushed my coat, shaking loose a few crystals of snow that settled on the hardwood. Sophie giggled as they melted. That sound was the first moment I believed we had stepped out of the worst of it. We set the tree near the window opposite the one already standing. I steadied the trunk, while she arranged the skirt around it. She worked slowly, as if decorating a tree were an act of careful repair. When she finished, she asked for the lights. Her voice was small, but clearer than I had heard it in days. Claire appeared in the doorway. She looked tired in a way that was not weakness, but the aftermath of someone who had finally stopped running. Her hands were folded, as if she was unsure whether she was allowed to step closer. When her eyes met mine, I gave a small nod. It was enough. She crossed the room and helped Sophie with the long strand of lights, untangling them, gently patient, in a way I had not seen from her in years. The doorbell rang as the last bulbs flickered to life. When I opened it, Agent Dean stood on the porch with the quiet air of someone carrying news that would not bruise. Snow caught the shoulders of his coat, and he brushed it aside before speaking. He did not stay long. Just long enough to place a small case in my hands and tell me the documentation was complete. I thanked him, though the words came out rough from the weight of everything behind them. After he left, I sat at the table and opened the case. My father's watch rested inside, polished and repaired, ticking with a steady heartbeat that filled the quiet. I held it for a moment, the metal warming slowly against my palm. Something eased in me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to permission to let go of what had been taken. Claire stood near the counter, hands wrapped around a mug Linda had set before her. She watched the watch, as if afraid to look too directly. I crossed to her and placed it gently in her hands. She hesitated, her fingers barely closing around it. I told her it was time she carried something stronger than fear. Her breath trembled, and she nodded once, the kind of nod that holds a promise to try. Linda poured a bit more coffee into my cup. She did not speak, but her hand touched my arm for just a second before she stepped back. Her gesture said what words did not need to explain. We had all lived through versions of this storm before. This time, none of us had stood alone. Sophie's voice drifted from the living room. She was humming something under her breath, arranging ornaments with the focus of a child rebuilding a world piece by piece. I watched her for a long moment. The glow from the second tree grew warmer as she added each ornament, and the light began to spill across the room like it belonged there. I stepped outside for a breath. The cold hit my face in a clean way that wiped the last shadows of the night from under my skin. I leaned on the railing, watching the snow settle over the yard. At the far edge of the walkway lay the imprint of footsteps from yesterday, already fading under fresh flakes. I realized how many years I had spent walking beside pain, without ever speaking its name. Silence had cost me more than anger ever could. Claire joined me at the doorway. She did not step outside, only rested a hand against the frame. She whispered that she was sorry for hiding so much. I told her I was sorry too. Not for anything I had said, but for all the things I had let slip by in my own quiet way. She nodded, and for the first time I believed she heard me not as her father, but as a man who understood the cost of silence. We stayed there until Sophie began to play something soft on the piano. Not perfectly, but with enough heart that the melody carried into the cold air. Silent Night. A small, imperfect offering that felt truer than anything else that day. I closed the door gently and hung my coat on the hook by the entryway, the same hook I used to pass by without a thought. Today, it felt like a small promise to remain present, to not disappear into the quiet again. The second tree glowed in the corner, warm and steady. I walked toward it, feeling the weight in my chest loosen little by little. Not gone, just lighter. Sophie looked up from the piano and smiled. Claire touched the watch, now resting against her palm, like a pulse she could finally trust. For the first time in a long season of our lives, the house felt like it was breathing evenly again. I stood there a moment longer, letting the warmth reach me. Not rushing it, not questioning it, just letting it be what it was, a beginning, soft, quiet, and enough.